I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway and saw Brenda Harrington standing next to my car with her phone out, taking pictures. It was February in Rochester, Minnesota, and the temperature had dropped to about 15 degrees that morning. Ice covered everything, and I'd just driven back from the hardware store where I'd finally found a decent ice scraper after losing my old one somewhere during the move last month. The new one was a beauty too, one of those heavy-duty models with the foam grip and extendable handle that cost me about $25. I'd left it on my front porch when I went inside to grab my mail, planning to put it in the garage in just a minute. Brenda was the vice president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, a title she wore like a crown. She was in her late 40s with that specific haircut that seemed to be issued along with HOA board positions, the kind where the back is shorter than the front, and there are blonde highlights that cost more than my monthly electric bill. She wore a puffy white coat and held her phone at arm's length, documenting what I assumed was another one of my supposed violations. "Can I help you?" I called out, walking across my lawn toward her. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Just documenting another infraction, Connor. Your trash bins are visible from the street, which violates Section 12.4 of the Community Guidelines." I glanced at my garage. The bins were barely peeking out from behind the half-open door. "They're in my garage, Brenda. Partially visible means visible." She finally looked at me, her expression stern. "You'll be receiving a fine notice by the end of the week. This is your third violation this month." "Third? What were the other two?" "Your Christmas lights were up past January 5th, and your car was parked on the street overnight on January 9th. I took a deep breath, feeling my jaw tighten. My car was in the shop. I had a rental that didn't fit in my garage because it was full of boxes I'm still unpacking, and the Christmas lights came down on January 6th because I was working late on the 5th. The rules are clear, Connor." She tucked her phone into her pocket and started walking toward the street. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before moving into a community with standards." I watched her climb into her white Lexus SUV and drive off, and that's when I remembered the ice scraper. I jogged up to my porch, but it wasn't there. I checked the ground around the steps, thinking maybe the wind had blown it off. Nothing. I went inside and looked in the entryway, wondering if I'd absent-mindedly brought it in. Still nothing. That ice scraper had been sitting right there on the porch railing less than 10 minutes ago. I'd placed it there myself, planning to move it to the garage after I sorted through my mail. Now it was gone. I stepped back outside and looked around the porch more carefully. There were footprints in the light dusting of snow that had fallen overnight, leading up to my porch and back down again. They were small, probably women's boots, and they definitely weren't mine. I followed them with my eyes and saw they led directly to where Brenda's car had been parked. No way, I thought. Even she wouldn't be that petty, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Brenda had been standing right there by my porch. She'd had plenty of time to grab it while I was getting my mail, and she'd seemed especially satisfied with herself when she drove away. I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Marcus, who lived 3 streets over in the same neighborhood. He'd been dealing with the HOA for 5 years and had warned me about them before I bought my house. "They're insane, man," he said when he answered. "What did they get you for now?" "I think Brenda stole my ice scraper." There was a pause, then laughter. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I just bought it, left it on my porch for literally 10 minutes, and now it's gone. She was standing right there taking pictures of my trash bins, and when she left, so did my scraper." "That's bold even for her," Marcus said. "But honestly, I wouldn't put it past any of them. Did you check your security camera?" "I don't have one yet. It's on my list." "Well, you're not going to get anywhere accusing her without proof. These HOA people stick together like glue. You need evidence. I thanked him and hung up, frustrated but knowing he was right. I couldn't just march over to Brenda's house and demand my ice scraper back without proof. She'd deny it, probably threaten me with more fines for harassment, and I'd be the one who looked crazy. The next morning, I woke up to find my car covered in a thick layer of ice. A winter storm had rolled through overnight, coating everything in a crystalline shell. I stood in my driveway in my heavy coat, staring at my car and realizing I had nothing to scrape it with. I ended up using an old credit card, which barely made a dent and took me 45 minutes to clear enough visibility to drive safely. I was late to work because of it. I'm a project manager at a construction firm downtown, and we had a big client meeting that morning. My boss, Steve, wasn't happy when I rushed in 20 minutes late with ice still clinging to my coat. "Traffic?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "Ice storm. Took forever to scrape my windows." "You don't have an ice scraper," I did. "Until yesterday." I didn't elaborate, and thankfully he didn't push. The meeting went fine, but I was distracted the whole time, thinking about that stupid ice scraper and how ridiculous it was that someone had actually stolen it from my porch. That afternoon, I stopped by the same hardware store on my way home. The scrapers were picked over after the storm, but I managed to find one similar to the one I'd bought before. This time, I paid $30 for an even better model with a brush on one end and a heavy-duty scraper on the other. The cashier, a young guy with red hair, rang me up and handed me the receipt. "Keep that receipt," he said. "We've got a return policy, but you need proof of purchase." I folded it and stuck it in my wallet, then drove home. When I got there, I took the scraper directly to my garage and put it on the workbench where it would be safe. No way was I giving Brenda or anyone else the chance to swipe this one. The next few days passed without incident, which should have been a relief, but instead felt like the calm before another storm. I went to work, came home, scraped my car each morning with my new scraper, and tried to ignore the fact that I was living in a neighborhood run by people who apparently had nothing better to do than measure the height of mailbox posts and count the hours Christmas lights stayed up. Then, on Saturday morning, I got an email from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. The subject line read, "Notice of Fine Violation 2026-02-174. I opened it with a sense of dread that turned out to be completely justified. "Dear Mr. Parker," it read. "This notice is to inform you that on February 10, 2026, your property was found in violation of Community Guidelines Section 19.7, prohibited items on porches and entryways. Specifically, an ice scraper was left on your front porch railing, which constitutes visual clutter and detracts from the community's aesthetic standards. A fine of $75 has been assessed to your account. Payment is due within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in additional penalties and potential legal action. Sincerely, Meadowbrook Hills HOA Board." I read it 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. They were fining me for the ice scraper that Brenda had stolen. The audacity was breathtaking. I immediately typed out a response email. "I am writing to dispute this fine. The ice scraper in question was on my porch for approximately 10 minutes before it was stolen. I should not be fined for an item that was removed from my property without my permission. Please remove this fine from my account." I hit send and sat back, waiting. An hour later, I got a response from Janet Pemberton, the HOA president. "Dear Mr. Parker, photographic evidence confirms the violation occurred. The HOA is not responsible for personal property management. The fine stands. Please remit payment by March 12, 2026. Photographic evidence." That meant Brenda had taken a picture of the scraper before stealing it, essentially documenting the violation and then removing the evidence. It was almost impressive in its calculated petness. I called Marcus again. They're fining me for the ice scraper. The one that was stolen. Yep. Brenda took pictures of it before she took it, and now they're using those pictures as evidence of a violation. Marcus whistled low. That's actually genius in a super evil way. What are you going to do? I don't know, fight it I guess, but I don't have proof she took it. You know what you need to do? You need to catch her with it. If she stole it, it's probably in her garage or her car. Get proof and then you've got her for theft. That's way bigger than an HOA fine. He had a point. If I could prove Brenda stole my property, the HOA fine would be the least of anyone's worries. But how was I supposed to get proof? I couldn't exactly break into her garage. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to Brenda's comings and goings. Her house was on Maple Drive, about 4 blocks from mine. I didn't go full stalker mode, but I did make a point of driving past her place on my way to and from work. Her white Lexus was usually parked in the driveway, and her garage door was always closed. On Wednesday evening, I was driving home from the grocery store when I saw her Lexus parked at the community center parking lot. The Meadowbrook Hills Community Center was where the HOA held their monthly meetings, and according to the calendar on their website, tonight was board meeting night. An idea formed in my mind. It was risky and probably stupid, but I was so frustrated with the whole situation that I was willing to take a chance. If Brenda had stolen my ice scraper, there was a good possibility it was in her car. And if she was in a meeting, her car would be unattended for at least an hour. I drove home, dropped off my groceries, and walked back to the community center. It was cold enough that my breath came out in white puffs, and the parking lot was mostly empty except for 5 cars, including Brenda's Lexus. I could see lights on in the community center windows and hear muffled voices inside. I walked casually past the Lexus, glancing through the windows. The interior was neat and clean, with nothing visible on the seats. I moved around to the back and cupped my hands against the rear window, peering into the cargo area. There, sitting in a plastic bin along with some reusable grocery bags and what looked like HOA flyers, was my ice scraper. I recognized it immediately, the foam grip and extendable handle exactly as I remembered. The price tag was even still attached, hanging from the handle by a small plastic string. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures through the window, making sure to capture the scraper clearly. My hands were shaking, partly from cold and partly from adrenaline. I had her. Brenda Harrington had stolen my property, fined me for having it, and now I had photographic proof that she'd taken it, but pictures through a car window might not be enough. I needed something more concrete, something that would prove beyond any doubt that this was my scraper and not just one that looked similar. I thought about the receipt in my wallet, the one the cashier had told me to keep. I pulled it out and looked at it under the parking lot lights. There was the date, the price, the item description. Ice scraper deluxe model with extendable handle. But there was something else too, something I hadn't noticed before. At the bottom of the receipt was a serial number for the scraper, presumably for warranty purposes. If I could get that serial number from the scraper in Brenda's car and match it to my receipt, I'd have ironclad proof. But that would require actually getting my hands on the scraper, which meant either waiting for her to take it out or figuring out how to get into her car. I stood in the parking lot, weighing my options. Breaking into her car was obviously illegal and would make me look worse than her. But if I went to the police with just pictures, would they even care? It was a $25 ice scraper, hardly grand theft. Then I remembered something Marcus had mentioned once. The HOA had a property manager, some guy named Doug Stevenson, who handled the day-to-day operations and dealt with vendor contracts and maintenance issues. He wasn't on the board, but he worked closely with them and had access to all their records and communications. Maybe, just maybe, there was something in those records that could help me. An email, a text, something that would prove what Brenda had done. I walked back home, my mind racing. I needed to talk to Doug Stevenson, but I couldn't just call him up and ask if he had evidence of board members stealing from residents. I needed an excuse, a legitimate reason to meet with him. The next morning, I sent an email to the HOA's general inbox. I would like to request a meeting with the property manager to discuss recent violations assessed to my property at 847 Oak Street. I believe there have been some misunderstandings and would like to resolve them professionally. Please let me know Mr. Stevenson's availability. I got a response within 2 hours from a generic HOA email address. Doug Stevenson is available tomorrow, Friday, February 14th at 2 p.m. at the Community Center office. Please confirm your attendance. I confirmed, then spent the rest of Thursday and Friday morning rehearsing what I was going to say. I needed to be calm, rational, and professional, even though I wanted to storm in there and demand justice for my stolen ice scraper. At 1:45 on Friday afternoon, I left work early and drove to the community center. The office was a small room at the back of the building, with a desk, filing cabinets, and a window overlooking the community pool that was currently covered for winter. Doug Stevenson was younger than I expected, probably in his mid-30s with dark hair and glasses. He stood up when I entered and shook my hand. "Connor Parker, right? Please have a seat." I sat down across from him. "Thanks for meeting with me, of course. Your email mentioned some misunderstandings about violations. How can I help?" I pulled out my phone and opened the email with the fine notice. I received this fine for leaving an ice scraper on my porch. The problem is, the ice scraper was only there for about 10 minutes before it was stolen from my property. I don't think I should be fined for something that was taken without my permission. Doug frowned and took my phone, reading the email. "I see. Do you have any evidence that it was stolen?" "I do, actually." I pulled up the pictures I'd taken of Brenda's car. "That's Brenda Harrington's vehicle, and that's my ice scraper in the back. She was at my property taking pictures of other supposed violations right around the time the scraper disappeared." Doug's frown deepened as he looked at the photos. "These were taken in our parking lot." "Yes, during the board meeting on Wednesday night." He was quiet for a moment, studying the images. "This is a serious accusation, Connor. You're saying a board member stole your property and then issued you a fine for having that property?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, and I can prove it's my scraper." I pulled out my receipt. I bought it on February 9th at Miller's Hardware. The receipt has the date, the price, and a serial number. If someone could check the serial number on the scraper in Brenda's car against this receipt, it would prove it's mine. Doug set my phone down and leaned back in his chair. He looked uncomfortable, which I understood. This was the kind of situation that could blow up the entire HOA board. "Let me be straight with you," he said after a moment. "I'm the property manager here, which means I work for the board, but I also work for the community. My job is to make sure this place runs smoothly and that residents are treated fairly. If what you're saying is true, that's a major problem." "It is true," I said. "I just need help proving it." Doug was quiet again, then he turned to his computer. "Give me a minute." He typed for a while, clicking through what looked like emails and documents. I sat there, trying not to get my hopes up but feeling a flutter of possibility. Maybe Doug was one of the good ones, someone who actually cared about doing the right thing. Finally, he turned the monitor so I could see it. On the screen was an email chain between Brenda and Janet, the HOA president. The first email, dated February 10th, was from Brenda. Caught Parker with items cluttering his porch again. Took photos for documentation. Also removed the item to prevent further aesthetic violations. We should fine him. Janet's response was brief. Agreed. Issue the fine. Good work on removing the eyesore. I stared at the screen, barely believing what I was reading. They documented it. Brenda had literally written in an email that she'd removed my property, and Janet had praised her for it. Can I get a copy of that? I asked, my voice tight. Doug nodded. I can print it for you. But Connor, you need to understand something. This email is internal HOA communication. If you use it publicly, there could be legal ramifications. You might want to think about how you want to handle this. How I want to handle it? I felt my temper rising. They stole from me and fined me for it. I want them held accountable. I get it, and I agree with you. But the HOA board has lawyers, and they're not going to go down without a fight. You need to be prepared for that. He printed the email chain and handed it to me. I folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket along with my receipt. What do you suggest I do? I asked. Doug thought for a moment. Personally, I'd go to the police. This is theft, plain and simple. File a report, show them the email and the photos, and let the legal system handle it. The HOA can fine you all they want, but if board members are committing crimes, that's bigger than community guidelines. I stood up and shook his hand. Thank you, really. I appreciate you showing me this. Just doing my job, he said. And between you and me, I'm tired of watching the board abuse their power. Maybe this will be a wake-up call. I left the community center and drove straight to the Rochester Police Department. The station was a modern building on 2nd Street Southwest, and the lobby was busy with people filing reports and officers coming and going. I waited for about 20 minutes before I was directed to a desk where a detective named Sarah Morrison took my information. She was in her 40s with short brown hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. What can I help you with? She asked. I explained the whole situation, starting with the missing ice scraper and ending with the email Doug had shown me. I provided the printed email chain, my receipt, and the photos of Brenda's car with the scraper visible inside. Detective Morrison listened without interrupting, taking notes on a pad. When I finished, she reviewed the documents I'd given her. This is pretty clear-cut, she said. The email is essentially a confession to theft, and if the serial number on the scraper matches your receipt, we've got solid evidence. The only question is whether Miss Harrington still has the item. She had it in her car on Wednesday night, I said. I don't know if she still has it. Well, let's find out. She picked up her phone and made a call. After a brief conversation, she hung up and looked at me. I'm going to have a patrol officer pay Miss Harrington a visit. If she cooperates and provides the scraper, we can check the serial number and go from there. If she doesn't cooperate or if the scraper is gone, things get more complicated, but we'll still have the email as evidence. What happens to her if it's proven she stole it? Theft under $500 is a misdemeanor in Minnesota. She'd likely face a fine, possibly probation, and she'd have a criminal record. Plus, you could sue her in civil court for damages, though for a $25 ice scraper, it's probably not worth the legal fees. It's not about the money, I said. It's about them thinking they can do whatever they want because they're on the HOA board. Detective Morrison nodded. I understand. Trust me, we've dealt with HOA disputes before. They can get nasty. Give me your contact information and I'll keep you updated on what happens. I left the police station feeling lighter than I had in days. Finally, someone in authority was taking this seriously. Finally, there might be consequences for Brenda's actions. That evening, I got a call from Detective Morrison. "We just spoke with Miss Harrington. She initially denied having your ice scraper, but when we mentioned we had evidence including photos and emails, she changed her tune. She provided the scraper, and the serial number matches your receipt. It's definitely yours." "So what now?" "She's being charged with petty theft. She'll have to appear in court, and you'll likely be called as a witness. I'll email you the case details and let you know when the court date is set." "Thank you, Detective." "No problem. One more thing, the HOA fine they issued you. You should dispute that through whatever channels they have. With a criminal charge pending against the board member who issued it, they'll probably drop it to avoid looking worse than they already do." After we hung up, I sat on my couch with a beer, processing everything. It had been less than a week since this whole thing started, and now Brenda Harrington, vice president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA, was facing criminal charges. It felt surreal. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and a dozen text messages. Most were from numbers I didn't recognize, but a few were from neighbors I'd met briefly since moving in. One text from Marcus Reed. "Dude, what did you do? The whole neighborhood is talking about Brenda getting arrested." I called him back. "She wasn't arrested. She's being charged with theft." Same difference around here. Everyone's losing their minds. The HOA Facebook group is imploding. "There's an HOA Facebook group?" "Oh yeah. It's private, but I can add you if you want to see the chaos." "Please do." 20 minutes later, I was scrolling through the most dramatic social media thread I'd ever seen. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA residents group had over 300 members, and it seemed like all of them were online at once. One post from a resident named Tom Williams read, "Can anyone confirm if it's true that Brenda Harrington was charged with stealing from a resident? I heard rumors but want to verify before jumping to conclusions." The replies were a mix of shock, defense of Brenda, and criticism of the board. "Brenda would never steal anything. This must be a misunderstanding. I heard she took an ice scraper off someone's porch because it violated community standards. That's not theft, that's enforcement. If board members are taking residents' property without permission, that's literally the definition of theft, standards or not. The board has been out of control for years. Maybe this will finally change things." I wanted to jump in and defend myself, but I knew it would only make things worse. Instead, I kept scrolling, watching the community tear itself apart over my $25 ice scraper. Then I saw a post from Janet Pemberton, the HOA president. "Dear residents, I want to address the rumors circulating about recent events. The board takes all allegations seriously and is conducting an internal review. We ask that everyone respect the privacy of those involved and refrain from speculation. The integrity of our community is paramount, and we will handle this matter appropriately." It was a masterclass in corporate speak that said absolutely nothing, but the replies were brutal. "Internal review. One of your board members is being charged with theft. This is beyond internal. How about addressing the fact that you approved fining someone for property that your vice president stole? That email is going to come out in court, you know. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in the current board. This is unacceptable." I closed the Facebook app and tried to focus on normal life, but it was impossible. Over the weekend, I got a knock on my door. It was Mrs. Chen from 2 houses down, an elderly woman I'd met once at the mailboxes. "Connor, is it true what they're saying about Brenda?" I didn't want to gossip, but I also didn't want to lie. "She took something from my property without permission. The police are handling it." Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. "That woman has needed to be taken down a peg for years." She fined my daughter 3 times in 1 month when she was staying with me last summer. Said her car was parked too close to the fire hydrant, even though it was a full 6 feet away. I measured. I'm sorry that happened to you. Don't be sorry. I'm glad someone's finally standing up to them. Most of us just pay the fines and keep quiet because it's easier than fighting. But maybe now things will change. She wasn't the only one who stopped by that weekend. I had visits from 4 other neighbors, all expressing similar sentiments. Apparently, the HOA board had been terrorizing residents for years, and my situation had finally given people the courage to speak up. On Monday morning, I got an email from Janet Pemberton. The subject line read, "Fine reversal and apology." I opened it with curiosity. Dear Mr. Parker, upon further review of the violation issued on February 10, 2026, the board has decided to reverse the fine and remove it from your account. We strive to maintain fairness in all our enforcement actions, and we believe this is the appropriate resolution in this case. We apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused. Sincerely, Janet Pemberton, HOA President. No mention of Brenda, no acknowledgement of theft, just a bland corporate apology that tried to make it sound like they were doing me a favor. I forwarded the email to Detective Morrison with a note. They reversed the fine but still won't admit what actually happened. She replied within an hour. Typical. They're trying to cover themselves legally. Don't worry, the criminal case is proceeding regardless of what the HOA does. The court date was set for March 18th, about a month away. In the meantime, life in Meadowbrook Hills got increasingly weird. The board scheduled an emergency meeting to address community concerns, which I didn't attend but heard about through Marcus. It was a disaster, he told me over the phone. People were yelling, demanding resignations, threatening to sue. Janet kept trying to maintain order, but she lost control about 10 minutes in. Someone even brought up that email you showed Doug. How did they know about the email? Doug might have mentioned it to a few people, or someone hacked the HOA server. Either way, it's out there now and people are furious. Good, I said. They should be. By the end of February, 2 other board members had resigned, leaving only Janet and Brenda, who was on temporary leave, according to an official HOA statement. Doug Stevenson took over most of the day-to-day operations and sent out an email promising a return to reasonable enforcement of community standards. I got my ice scraper back from the police evidence locker in early March. It felt ridiculous to go through the whole process of claiming evidence for something so mundane, but I did it anyway. When I held it in my hands again, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of everything that had happened over this stupid piece of plastic and foam. The court date finally arrived on a cold Tuesday in mid-March. I took the morning off work and drove to the Olmsted County Courthouse. Detective Morrison met me in the lobby. "Ready?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with only a few rows of benches. Brenda was there with her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man in an expensive suit who looked deeply unhappy to be defending a theft case over an ice scraper. Janet Pemberton was also there, sitting in the back row. The prosecutor, a woman named Lisa Hendricks, called me to the stand first. I swore to tell the truth and sat down, trying not to look at Brenda. "Mr. Parker, can you describe what happened on February 10th of this year?" I went through the whole story, from buying the ice scraper to discovering it missing to finding it in Brenda's car. The prosecutor submitted the receipt, the photos, and the email chain as evidence. Then Brenda's lawyer cross-examined me. "Mr. Parker, isn't it true that the ice scraper was left on your porch in violation of HOA rules? It was there for about 10 minutes before it was taken." But it was in violation during those 10 minutes, correct? I suppose, technically. And isn't it true that HOA board members have the authority to remove items that violate community standards? They have the authority to issue fines and request removal. They don't have the authority to take personal property without permission. That's theft. The lawyer tried a few more angles, but none of them went anywhere. The facts were too clear. When Brenda took the stand, she was visibly nervous. Her lawyer had clearly coached her, but she still struggled. "Miss Harrington, why did you take Mr. Parker's ice scraper?" the prosecutor asked. "I didn't think of it as taking," Brenda said. "I thought of it as removing a violation. We'd had issues with Mr. Parker before, and I was trying to maintain community standards." "Did you have Mr. Parker's permission to remove his property?" "No, but I assumed he would understand it was for the good of the community." "And did you issue him a fine for having that property which you had removed?" Brenda hesitated. "The fine was for the violation, not specifically for the item." "But you fined him for having an item that you yourself had taken from his property." "I was following protocol." The prosecutor submitted the email chain. "Is this your email, Miss Harrington? The one where you state that you removed the item and suggest fining Mr. Parker?" Brenda's face flushed. "Yes, but I was trying to do my job as a board member. Your job as a board member includes taking residents' personal property without permission. I made a mistake in judgment." It went on like that for another 20 minutes. By the end, even Brenda's lawyer looked defeated. The judge, an older man named Henry Patterson, reviewed the evidence and then addressed the courtroom. "This is one of the more unusual cases I've presided over. That being said, the law is clear. Miss Harrington, regardless of your intentions or your position on the HOA board, you took property that did not belong to you without the owner's permission. That constitutes theft under Minnesota law. I find you guilty of petty theft and sentence you to a fine of $300 plus restitution to Mr. Parker for the cost of the ice scraper and any associated expenses. You will also serve 40 hours of community service. Additionally, I strongly suggest that the Meadowbrook Hills HOA review their policies regarding enforcement, because this situation should never have escalated to a criminal case." Brenda looked like she might cry. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder and whispered something to her. The judge continued, "Mr. Parker, you will be reimbursed for your ice scraper and any court costs. I hope you and Miss Harrington can find a way to coexist in your community going forward." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As people filed out of the courtroom, Janet Pemberton approached me in the hallway. "Connor, I hope we can put this behind us and move forward positively." I looked at her, this woman who had defended Brenda's actions and tried to cover up the theft. "You know what, Janet? I don't think we can. You and Brenda abused your power and you got caught. I'm going to make sure everyone in the neighborhood knows exactly what happened here." She stiffened. "Are you threatening me?" "No. I'm promising you that I'm going to be at every single HOA meeting from now on, and I'm going to hold you accountable for every single decision you make. Transparency, Janet. Look it up." I walked away before she could respond. Over the next few weeks, word spread through Meadowbrook Hills about the court case. The local newspaper even picked up the story, running a piece titled "HOA Board Member Convicted of Theft in Ice Scraper Dispute." It was a small story buried in the local section, but it was enough to cause a major uproar. At the next HOA meeting in April, the room was packed. Every seat was taken and people lined the walls. Marcus saved me a spot in the front row. Janet Pemberton stood at the podium, looking uncomfortable. "We have a lot to discuss tonight, but first, I want to address the recent events involving the board. Brenda Harrington has resigned from her position as vice president, effective immediately. The board will hold elections for her replacement next month. A man in the back raised his hand. What about you, Janet? You approved the fine that was based on stolen property. Shouldn't you resign too? Janet's jaw tightened. I acted based on the information I had at the time. In hindsight, I should have been more thorough, but I don't believe resignation is necessary. The room erupted in arguments. Some people defended Janet, saying everyone makes mistakes. Others called for her immediate removal. Doug Stevenson, who was sitting off to the side, raised his hand. "May I say something?" Janet nodded, looking relieved to hand over the floor. Doug stood up. "I've been the property manager here for 3 years, and I've seen a lot of issues with how the board operates. I think we need to make some serious changes to how violations are enforced, how fines are issued, and how board members are held accountable. I've drafted some proposed policy changes that I'd like the community to review. They include requiring photo evidence and resident notification before any fines are issued, creating an appeals process that doesn't go through the board, and implementing term limits for board positions." People nodded and murmured in agreement. Janet looked like she'd just been undermined, which she had. "I'll send these proposals to everyone by email," Doug continued. "We can vote on them at next month's meeting." The meeting continued for another hour, covering routine topics like landscaping contracts and pool maintenance. But the energy had shifted. Residents were engaged now, asking questions and demanding answers instead of just sitting quietly while the board dictated rules. When I left that night, Marcus walked with me to the parking lot. "You started a revolution, man." "I just wanted my ice scraper back," I said, laughing. "Well, you got it back and took down a corrupt board member in the process. Not bad for a few weeks' work." He was right. What had started as a petty theft had exposed years of HOA abuse and sparked a community-wide push for reform. In May, the HOA held elections for Brenda's replacement and several other open positions. I didn't run myself. I had no interest in being on the board, but several reasonable, level-headed residents did. The elections were contentious, with multiple candidates and actual debates about HOA policy instead of the rubber stamp approval process that had apparently been the norm for years. Doug's proposed policy changes were voted through almost unanimously. The new rules required transparency, accountability, and resident input in ways that had never existed before. Janet Pemberton remained president, but with far less power than she'd wielded before. She seemed to accept this reluctantly, probably figuring it was better than being forced out entirely. By the time summer arrived, Meadowbrook Hills felt like a different neighborhood. People were friendlier, more engaged, and less afraid of the HOA. I still got the occasional violation notice. My grass was apparently a quarter-inch too long once, but the fines were reasonable, and there was an actual appeals process if I disagreed. Brenda Harrington kept a low profile. I saw her occasionally at the grocery store or driving through the neighborhood, but she never made eye contact. She'd completed her community service and paid her fines, and as far as I knew, she was keeping to herself. One evening in late June, I was sitting on my porch with a beer, enjoying the warm weather when Mrs. Chen walked by with her dog. She waved and came up my driveway. "Connor, I wanted to thank you again for what you did. My daughter is coming to visit next month, and for the first time in years, I'm not worried about her getting harassed by the HOA. I'm glad things are better," I said, "though I didn't really do anything except stand up for myself. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person willing to say enough is enough." She continued her walk, and I sat there thinking about everything that had happened. It really had started with something so small and ridiculous. An ice scraper. $25, 10 minutes on my porch. But it had revealed something much bigger. A system that had gone unchecked for too long, run by people who believed their authority put them above the rules they enforced on everyone else. I finished my beer and went inside, glancing at the garage where my ice scraper now lived safely on the workbench. It was just a piece of plastic and foam, but it had become a symbol of something important. A reminder that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it seems trivial to everyone else. The next morning, I was getting ready for work when I got an email from Doug Stevenson. "Connor, wanted to give you a heads up. Janet Pemberton announced her resignation this morning. She's moving to Florida to be closer to her grandkids. The board will hold elections for president next month. Just thought you'd want to know. Thanks for everything you did to shake things up around here. Doug." I read the email twice, surprised but not shocked. Janet had been holding on by a thread, and with the community watching her every move, the job had probably stopped being worth the trouble. I replied, "Thanks for letting me know, and thanks for showing me that email back in February. None of this would have happened without your help." His response came quickly. "Just doing the right thing. Someone had to." The presidential election happened in July, and a retired teacher named Robert Martinez won in a landslide. He'd lived in Meadowbrook Hills for over a decade and had a reputation for being fair and reasonable. His first act as president was to send an email to all residents apologizing for the previous board's overreach and promising a new era of collaborative community management. Marcus texted me when the email went out. "We did it, man. We actually fixed the HOA." I texted back, "You mean I got my ice scraper stolen, filed charges, and accidentally started a reform movement?" Tomato, tomato, I laughed and set my phone down. Life in Meadowbrook Hills had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The board was functional and transparent. Residents were engaged. And I could leave things on my porch without worrying about them being confiscated by power-hungry board members. In August, I ran into Brenda at a community event, one of those summer barbecues the HOA organized. I was getting a burger when I saw her standing by the drinks table, looking uncomfortable. Our eyes met, and for a moment I thought she might just walk away, but she didn't. She came over to me. "Connor, can I talk to you for a minute?" I nodded, curious. We walked away from the crowd, over to a quiet spot near the playground. Brenda looked tired, older than she had 6 months ago. "I wanted to apologize," she said. "Not because my lawyer told me to or because it looks good for me, but because I genuinely owe you an apology. What I did was wrong. I let the position go to my head and I hurt you and probably a lot of other people in the process. I'm sorry." I studied her face, trying to determine if she was sincere. She seemed to be. "I appreciate that," I said. "It took guts to come over here and say it. I've been doing a lot of thinking since the court case. About why I acted the way I did, about what being on the board meant to me. I think I liked the power too much. I liked feeling important, like I was protecting the neighborhood. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that these are people's homes, not just properties to be managed." "I'm glad you figured that out," I said. "For what it's worth, I don't hate you. I hated what you did, but I think everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow." She smiled slightly. "That's more generous than I deserve, but thank you. I hope you know that I returned your ice scraper in the same condition I took it. I know. It's in my garage now, safe and sound. Good." She looked back at the barbecue. "I should go. I just wanted to say that. Take care, Connor." "You too, Brenda." She walked back to her car and left the event. I stood there for a moment, processing the conversation. It didn't erase what had happened, but it felt like closure in a way I hadn't expected. The rest of the summer passed peacefully. I got to know my neighbors better, joined the community center gym, and even volunteered to help organize the fall festival. Meadowbrook Hills felt like an actual community now, not just a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules. In September, I was cleaning out my garage when I found the receipt for the ice scraper, still tucked in an old jacket pocket. I looked at it, this little piece of paper that had been such crucial evidence just 7 months ago. It seemed absurd now, thinking about how a receipt for a $25 ice scraper had helped take down a corrupt HOA board member. But that's how change often happens, isn't it? Not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through ordinary people standing up for themselves over ordinary things. An ice scraper, a parking space, a Christmas light left up one day too long. I threw away the receipt. I didn't need it anymore. The scraper was mine, documented and returned. The case was closed. The board was reformed. Life had moved on. That evening, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, Connor, this is Sarah Morrison, the detective who handled your case. I wanted to let you know that I just filed charges against another HOA board member in a different neighborhood for a similar abuse of power situation. The resident who came forward said your case gave her the courage to speak up. Just thought you'd want to know that the ripples from your ice scraper are spreading. Keep fighting the good fight." I stared at my phone, amazed. What had seemed like such a personal, isolated incident had apparently inspired other people to stand up against HOA abuse. It was humbling and empowering at the same time, I replied. "Thank you for letting me know. Glad I could help, even indirectly." As autumn arrived and the leaves started changing colors, I found myself reflecting on the entire experience. I'd moved to Meadowbrook Hills in January looking for a nice, quiet neighborhood with good schools for when I eventually had kids and a reasonable commute to work. Instead, I'd stumbled into an HOA nightmare that had tested my patience, my courage, and my willingness to stand up for myself. But I'd also discovered a community of neighbors who cared about fairness and were willing to fight for it. I'd met people like Doug Stevenson, who risked his job to do the right thing, and Detective Morrison, who took a silly case seriously because it mattered to the person involved. I'd even seen Brenda Harrington show genuine remorse and growth. In October, the HOA held its annual meeting to review the year and plan for the next one. Robert Martinez, the new president, stood at the podium with a smile. "It's been quite a year for Meadowbrook Hills," he began. "We've faced challenges, made changes, and come out stronger as a community. I want to thank everyone who participated in the reform process, everyone who voted, everyone who shared their concerns and ideas. This is your neighborhood, and it should reflect your values." People applauded. I saw Doug Stevenson sitting in the front row, looking proud. Mrs. Chen was there with her daughter. Marcus gave me a thumbs up from across the room. Robert continued. "I also want to acknowledge that this transformation started with one resident who refused to accept an injustice, even over something as small as an ice scraper. Connor Parker, would you stand up?" I felt my face flush as I stood. Everyone turned to look at me, and then they started clapping. It wasn't just polite applause, it was genuine appreciation. Connor showed us that it's worth fighting for what's right, no matter how trivial it might seem to others, Robert said. His courage sparked a movement that has made Meadowbrook Hills a better place to live. So thank you, Connor. I sat down quickly, embarrassed but also touched. I'd never set out to be anyone's hero. I just wanted my ice scraper back. The meeting continued with discussions about snow removal contracts, holiday decorations policies, and plans for updating the community center. Everything was done transparently, with resident input and board accountability. It was how an HOA should operate. When the meeting ended, Several people came up to thank me personally and share their own stories of past HOA abuse. It seemed like everyone had a tale of unreasonable fines, arbitrary rule enforcement, or board members who acted like petty tyrants. But things were different now, and people were hopeful. As I drove home that night, I thought about how strange life can be. 6 months ago, I'd been furious about a stolen ice scraper and a $75 fine. Now, I was being thanked at community meetings for accidentally starting a reform movement. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at my house. It was a good house in a good neighborhood. The HOA still had rules, but they were reasonable now, enforced fairly by people who remembered they were serving residents, not ruling over them. I grabbed my work bag from the passenger seat and walked to my front door. On the porch, right where I'd left it that fateful day in February, I placed my ice scraper, just for a moment, just to see. It sat there on the railing, foam grip gleaming in the porch light, extendable handle retracted. A simple tool for a simple purpose. Nothing more, nothing less. I picked it up and took it inside with me. Some experiments aren't worth repeating, but as I closed the door behind me, I smiled. Because that ice scraper, ridiculous as it was, had taught me something important. Standing up for yourself matters. Holding people accountable matters. Fighting for what's right matters, even when it's over something small. And sometimes, the smallest things can lead to the biggest changes. The end of the year brought snow and cold, and I used my ice scraper regularly. Every single time I scraped ice off my windshield, I thought about Brenda taking it, about the email Doug showed me, about Detective Morrison taking my case seriously, about Judge Patterson's ruling. That scraper had become more than just a tool. It was a reminder of what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice. Life in Meadowbrook Hills continued to improve. The new board implemented even more reforms, including a monthly newsletter, open office hours, and a suggestion box for residents. The culture shifted from fear and resentment to cooperation and community. In December, I received a check in the mail from the HOA. It was a refund of all the fines I'd been issued during Brenda and Janet's tenure, along with a letter from Robert Martinez apologizing on behalf of the board and noting that several other residents had also been refunded improper fines. I deposited the check and used the money to buy a security camera for my front porch, not because I was worried about future thefts, but because it seemed like a responsible thing to do. The irony wasn't lost on me. As the year came to a close, I found myself actually enjoying life in the neighborhood. I'd made friends, gotten involved in community activities, and felt like I belonged. The HOA drama had become a story I told at parties, one that people found hilarious and outrageous in equal measure. On New Year's Eve, I was invited to a party at Marcus's house. Most of the neighborhood was there, including Doug Stevenson and several new board members. We counted down to midnight together, celebrating not just the new year but also the new era for Meadowbrook Hills. At midnight, Marcus raised his glass. To Connor and his ice scraper, may we all have the courage to fight for what's right, no matter how small it seems. Everyone laughed and cheered. I shook my head, grinning. To reasonable HOA boards and property managers who do the right thing, more cheers. We drank and celebrated, and I felt grateful for the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. Later that night, as I walked home through the quiet streets of Meadowbrook Hills, I looked at the houses around me. Behind each door was a family, a person, a life. And now, thanks to a stolen ice scraper and a community that decided enough was enough, those people could live without fear of arbitrary punishment or abuse of power. I reached my house and stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the cold winter air. The ice scraper was safely in my garage, exactly where it belonged. The receipt was long gone. The fine had been refunded. Brenda had faced consequences. Janet had resigned. The board had been reformed. Justice in the end had been served. And all because I'd refused to let them get away with stealing my ice scraper. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, closing it firmly behind me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new experiences, new stories. But tonight I was content. The ice scraper saga was finally, truly over.